Good afternoon. Under the aegis of Indian Association of Cosmetic Dermatology and Gynecology and Aesthetic Health Committee of Indian Menopause Society, along with the Indian Fertility Society Haryana chapter, Dr. Ragini Agarwal presents the fourth episode of Demystifying Human Sexuality, an ongoing series every Thursday till this year end. On behalf of Jackson Park Pharmaceuticals, I am Saxena, along with my teammate Dr. Deepika Chabra. We bring warm greetings to all. To improve the erectile function, Jackson Park presents to you Lycoret Soft Gel, the cell protector. Protects nitric oxide viability, preserve endothelial mitochondrial structure integrity. The most trusted form of estrogen, micronized endonorm EV2, estradiol valerate 2 mg, and also we have Endorate 2 mg tablet of Dynogest for endometriosis. A warm welcome to the faculty and to all attendees. Please post your queries by text in Q&A box, which will be answered at the end. Please note this webinar is streaming live on Jackson Pearl Facebook Live, and the link is already being shared on the chat box. The recording will remain on YouTube channel, Jackson Pearl Medical Insights, for reference and promotion. We welcome chairperson for today's program, Dr. Reema Goyal, Secretary, Mission Pink Health, IMA Gurgaon, and Joint Secretary, Gurugram Menopause Society. We welcome her as she fills in for Dr. Sonu Balhara Elawat, Secretary, Haryana Chapter, Indian Fertility Society. As Dr. Sonu Balhara is busy today, and we have Dr. Priya Varshne, Joint Secretary, Haryana Chapter, Indian Fertility Society, as chairperson. Now I request Chairperson Dr. Priya Varshne to kindly introduce the first speaker and initiate the program.
Welcome everyone to another session of Demystifying Human Sexuality by Dr. Ragini Agarwal ma'am. To all the new viewers, we wanted to know that this is a series which is aimed to throw lights on the female and male sexual disorders, which is the most hidden part in the treatment practice. So this is the fourth episode where we will be discussing about the sexual disorders and arousal problem in males and females. So female arousal problems and low sexual desire in the males is very common complaint which is presenting to gynae clinics and fertility clinics. But unfortunately, we don't have any answer to them. So in the today's series, we wanted to learn from the experts that how can we help these patients who are presenting to us with these problems. So introducing our first speakers of the today's session, where we have the first talk on low sexual desire on men. The speaker will be Dr. Raman Tanwar. So he just can you please display the CV of Dr. Raman? He is a chief urologist and andrologist at Eurocenter. He has various accolades to her honor. He has done his fellowship in andrology and is a chief andrologist and practicing urologist in Gurgaon. He is a editorial member of 5 journals and has over 100 publications and presentations to his accolades. His main area of interest is into andrology and sexual medicine. So today he'll be talking upon on low sexual desire in males, and I think he'll do a great justice to the topic. Over to you, Dr. Raman, for your talk.
Thank you, Dr. Priya. Again, it's always an honor to be back and be talking about sexual dysfunction. So I think today we have a very tricky topic on which I have to give a talk. And this topic, whenever the couple presents with this problem, then you have to spare some extra time from your own. So one of the challenges usually when I'm dealing with a patient with low sexual desire is that most of the doctors, they don't have an idea about the causes of low sexual desire, because this as such falls into a lot of domains. It falls into the domain of an andrologist, falls into the domain of a psychologist, it falls into the domain of a psychiatrist, it falls in the domain of sometimes a general practitioner, it falls in the domain of an infertility expert as well. So considering that it is falling into the domain of so many different people, it means that it is difficult to have one expert on it. But I think for the male sexual dysfunction, the andrologist is quite aptly equipped with all the things that they need to treat this disorder. And the focus in my presentation would be on a working algorithm as to when we call somebody as having a sexual disorder or low sexual disorder, or how to differentiate it from a hyperactive sexual desire disorder. And lastly, also how to work up these patients and give them the right treatment. So let me start by sharing my slides with all of you. So I hope you can all see my slides. And basically, the definition is having most of the answers. When somebody presents with low sexual desire, it's usually proposed as an umbrella term for a hyperactive sexual desire disorder. But we learn in the presentation that there's a huge difference between a hyperactive sexual desire disorder and the low sexual desire. So basically, when do we call a patient as having a low sexual desire is when there's a diminished or absent feeling of sexual desire or interest in that particular patient. The absence of sexual thoughts has to be there, or fantasies has to be there, and there's a lack of a responsive desire. So basically, it's not just about feelings, and even the response to those feelings also is something. Sometimes you may have feelings, but you may not be able to respond. So these all fall in the definition of low sexual desire. And basically, this is the term which has this definition has been given by the international consultation by the ISSM Society. So basically, you have to understand that in this problem, the frequency of the desire is diminishing. So it's not just that they don't have a desire. Even if the frequency of the desire is less, we can aptly call it as having a low sexual desire. The presence of personal and interpersonal distress has been suggested as a requisite to justify clinical intervention in the sexual dysfunction. Because many times, we used to think that, okay, it's a couple problem, as in like Mia Bibi ka jhagda, so why, fall into this. But the definition also includes this Mia Bibi ka jhagda into the treatment protocol, and this has to be resolved because they have figured out that this jhagda usually is the quarrel between, or the interpersonal distances usually resulting from some of the other components of low sexual desire as well. Now, a disclaimer here is that whatever we're going to discuss is from a very academic discussion today, and we are bound to follow certain guidelines which are exactly not Indian guidelines. So we may have a difference of opinion in our clinical practice from the European literature and the American literature, where the pedestal on which the sexual health is placed is a little different from the Indian pedestal. So basically, we will figure out that cultural impact also has a huge role to play in this. So let us first look at the prevalence of low sexual desire or interest in men when we compare it to the other sexual desire disorders. Because whenever we are studying a topic, it's important to understand the actual prevalence of that particular disorder. So trouble on maintaining or achieving erection, it's present in 10% of patients who present to a general OPD. Anxiety about performance is present in about 18% of patients who present to an andrology OPD. sex not being very pleasurable is a problem in 10% of patients. Coming too soon is a problem in about 30% of patients. Unable to get an orgasm is about 8%. And if you would realize, we've discussed all these common things in our previous series. Well, because it's the 4th episode, so in the last 3 episodes, we've tried to do justice to all of these previous conditions. And now we are talking about the last one today, which is lack of interest in sex. So as you will see, the prevalence is almost half of the prevalence of premature ejaculation. So, this is a very, very important topic. But whenever we have our conferences, whenever we have our discussions, usually they fall around erectile dysfunction, they fall out premature ejaculation or anorgasmia or ejaculatory disorders. And then we usually move on to the infertility domain. So nobody likes to touch on low sexual desire or hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or any sexual desire disorder for that matter, because they feel that it's such a potpourri of things and specialities that it's better to not discuss too much about. But we're not going to basically you have to, there's a low sexual desire disorder. Then it's about 3 things: the drive, the motive, the wish. So drive is a biological drive. It depends on the brain, it depends upon the hormones. The motive is the individual and the relationship psychology. So that's where the couple comes in. And wish also is a cultural component. So basically that's where I said, that sometimes we may have disagreement between what the European or the American literature would say, or the Western literature would say, and what the Asian literature would say, or the Indian literature would say. So typically, when we look at the risk factors of having a low sexual desire, you will find some correlation. So this is we have a collection of a lot of you can say figures and tables from a lot of articles, which are all meta-analysis or reviews. So age between 60 to 90 is a risk factor. Age between 70 to 80 is a higher risk factor, as you can see with the odds ratio and various studies. Poor overall health is one of the reasons of having low sexual desire. Vascular diseases are one of the things which are associated with low sexual desire. If you are a current smoker, there is more chances of having low sexual desire. Believe that aging reduces sex. This is again a risk factor in a way, because many times, you'll have patients who come to my OPD, they'll be 42 years of age. Sir, ab to hum boode ho gaye, we've grown old, and I don't think now we have got children, we've got a responsibility, so we shouldn't be getting close. That's what the perception is. So that belief itself, that aging, as you age, is going to reduce sex itself, is a risk factor for low sexual desire. So that's a wonderful thing to be included by scientists. So divorce in the past 3 years is again one of the risk factors for low sexual desire disorder, and the odds ratio is pretty high. It's about 8 or 4 as per 2 different studies. Now, if the couple is having a financial problem in the last 3 years, that's been associated with low sexual desire. Depression being diagnosed as a clear-cut association with low sexual desire. Worrying about the future of the relationship, or having less frequent sexual relationship. If it's less than 1 week, 1 per week, then the ratio is relatively 2 or 2.5. Whereas if it's once in a month, then of course the odds ratio is much higher. So it means that the lesser you have sex, the less you will have the desire to have sex. So this is another very important concept that I want everyone to know, that if the couple is not having sex frequently, then they are bound to have low desire. So the more they engage, the more they are going to have desire. And another important concept that I would like to give today is that couples who do not engage in foreplay, they have higher chance of having a low sexual desire. So 3 important things that just to highlight from the etiology, the gross etiology, the drive, motive, and wish thing, the theory, and then the belief that aging will reduce the sexual activity. The lesser you have sexual activity, the lesser you have the desire for having sexual activity. And if you don't engage in foreplay, then you are not going to have great sex, or you won't be very active, or your sexual life won't be very active. Now let's look at the theoretical and academic part of it, which is medical and psychological factors which can lead to a low sexual desire. So androgen deficiency, because we know that testosterone is one of the main hormones in the male, which is going to drive us to have sex. So those thoughts, that feeling to undergo sexual activity, they are quite dependent on testosterone. So androgen deficiency or low testosterone, or sometimes because of aging, we fall in androgens, which we call as menopause, which I know how many of us have come across as a term apart from menopause, or sometimes we call the menopause as Adam also, which is the androgen deficiency of the aging male. These are important reasons for having a low sexual desire. Increase in the prolactin. So this is common for both males and females, that the prolactin increase can lead to low testosterone, and testosterone itself, because we know, directly governs the libido. So that's going to again lead to a low sexual desire. If there's a anxiety, if there's any aggression, if there's anger, that's one of the reasons why there can be low sexual desire, because of the growing frustrations. Depression as such itself suppresses all the regions of the brain. We've already seen that depression as such can lead to a number of problems, like even pseudo-Cushing syndrome, which is there is obesity when you are depressed. You keep eating so much. So it suppresses most of the things, and the sexual desire so is suppressed, adequately assessed, as well as it has to be adequately addressed when we are taking care of the situation. Then we talk about relationship conflict. As we said, that relationship conflict or interpersonal relationship in a couple is a very, very important aspect when we're talking about low sexual desire. Because if you're not attracted to the partner, or if you have got a lot of conflicts between the couple, and we will learn how to assess it with just a few questions today, then you're bound to have a low sexual desire for that particular partner. But it's not that you will not have fantasy. You may masturbate, you may abuse the erotic material around you, but you will still have a low sexual desire, because your partner's thoughts or your aversion to that partner will keep coming in the way. Antidepressant therapy, stroke, epilepsy, post-traumatic stress syndrome, these are some of the central causes, or you can say the nervous system causes, which can have a direct impact on our sexual desire. Then chronic problems like renal failure, congestive heart failure, coronary artery disease, HIV, these can also cause low sexual desire. Bodybuilding and eating disorders can also contribute to low sexual desire. So all these, whenever the patient comes to you, start thinking about all these causes. You think about his hormones, you start thinking about the relationship the patient has, you start thinking about his present mental condition, you start thinking about his overall medical health and special situations like bodybuilding, eating disorders. So you think about all these things when the patient comes to you and says, Dr. Saab, I don't feel like having sex with my partner. Now, basically, of the various things that we've studied, this is a very important chart, although a little confusing. So let me clear this for you. So only erection concerns, the lack of erotic thoughts, and the restrictive attitudes, such as the cultural attitudes, they are having a direct relationship with low sexual problems. So the medical factor that we discussed, they don't play a direct role, they play an indirect role. Sadness, shame, and all these, they play an indirect role in causing low sexual desire. So this is something that we need to understand, that most important or direct impact is by the sexual dysfunction and by certain other changes in the mind, which are usually interpersonal, and by cultural traditions. That's why we talked about drive, motive, and wish. These are the most important things that we have to understand. And that's what the entire mind map that you're seeing right now on the slide is all about. Now, what is the normal frequency of sex? I think this is a very, very important question, because when you call somebody diseased, you should know what is normal. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer, but fortunately we have some studies. But usually these studies that I'm quoting, they are usually from the Western side of literature, where the cultural traditions are very different from that of India. So majority of the participants in the most respected paper around the normal frequency of sex are about 1 to 4 times a week. So basically, as per the definition of somebody talking about normal frequency, the sexual activity occurring less than once every 2 weeks for persons less than 55 years or younger can be classified as low sexual activity. So I don't know if you would agree to this definition, but ideally any couple should be kind of consummating once in 2 weeks at least. So the criteria for establishing a diagnosis of low sexual desire are a diminished or absent feeling of sexual interest or desire, an absent sexual thought or fantasy, a lack of a responsive desire, which means that you act on the desire also. If the response is not there, then that's also a problem. And scars or absent motivations or reasons or incentive for attempting to become sexually aroused, and personal and interpersonal distress. These are all criteria for establishing the diagnosis of low sexual desire. Now, how do you assess the depression in this patient when it comes to me? I usually ask them 2 questions, and if the answer to both of them is no, then I feel that the depression is unlikely to be in the man. And this has been supported by studies also. So these 2 questions are: during the past month, have you been bothered or feeling down or depressed or helpless? So this helplessness or depression or feeling down, the man can identify this easily. But it's just that, being a man, usually they don't talk about it openly, but they're able to identify it quite easily. Then the other question I ask them is, during the past month, have you been bothered by little interest or pleasure in doing things? Is there a general apathy that you have towards things that you don't in life? If any of those answers are yes, then we start evaluating the patient for depression, and typically it's done by referring the patient to an appropriate professional. The second thing that you need to assess in this patient is the quality of relationship. Ask these many questions to them. Do you and your partner agree or disagree on displays of affection? If you're talking about displaying affection, it means that you are sexually aroused, at least you're thinking about each other in that way and not like a brother or sister. Do you often think about getting a divorce or separation or ending the relationship? Is that something that is on your mind? In the general, do you think that things are fine between you and your wife? This is something that I asked them. Do you ever confide in your partner? Do you tell about your day? Do you tell about, what bothers you? Do you ever regret that you got married, or are you living together? And how many times do you and your partner discuss the things calmly? So I know these are controversial questions, and most of the times, you will find the answers as no if you're a typical Indian couple. But these are the questions which tell us about the quality of relationship. And this is not just something which I am putting down with my own experience. All these questions are mentioned in various studies. And the latest consensus that was with ISSM was also mentioning all these questions. How many times do you and your partner work together in something? So you should always have common activities as a couple. That helps improve the quality of the relationship. Circle the number that best corresponds to a level of happiness as a couple. So now there we have 7 points, 1 to 7, and 1 is the lowest happiness, 7 is the highest. So this is some of the ways in which you can assess the quality of the relationship of that patient. Then clinically, of course, you look at the secondary sexual characteristics, you get to know the level of androgenization, you check about any other existing sexual dysfunction. So I ask about ED, I ask about PME, we use the erectile hardness score to assess it. And then we do 3 important tests: the testosterone, the prolactin, thyroid function. And basically, you have to understand what is the difference between low sexual desire and hypoactive sexual desire disorder. So hypoactive sexual desire disorder is a little, you can say, a subset of low sexual desire. And here, basically, the definition as per the DSM criteria is that there has to be a persistent or recurrent deficiency or absence of sexual fantasies and desire for sexual activity. And this judgment is made by the clinician, usually taking into factor the various things around the patient's life. The disturbance causes a marked distress or interpersonal difficulty. It should cause a distress also. It's just not that it should simply exist. If it's not causing a distress, then it is not classified as HSDD. And the sexual dysfunction is not accounted for by any other thing, any other sexual disorder dysfunction like PME or ED. That's something which should be there, and it should not be resulting from any substance abuse or from a general medical condition. Only then you call it a hypoactive sexual desire disorder. Now, basically, this is how I work up a patient once he comes to me with low sexual desire. First, I ask him about the definition. Does he fit into the definition? So I ask him about how bothered he is. So all those things that we discussed. And if we feel that it is not confirmed, then we investigate about the other sexual problems that this patient may have or other psychological conditions that the patient may have. And if the patient has them, then we provide that specific treatment. If the patient doesn't have them, then basically we would provide just counseling around it. If the patient has LSD as per the definition and as per the clinical investigation, then basically we look at the causes. So there are 4 main causes that we're going to look at: the psychiatric condition, whether there's depression, whether there's anxiety, If there is, then you treat that. If there's a relationship conflict, if there is, then you send the patient to a relationship expert, or a couple therapy sort of session can be taken. Then we rule out any endocrinological problems. So I already talked about testosterone, prolactin, thyroid issues that are commonly there. And then lastly, HSDD. If all these things are normal, then you call that patient as having HSDD, and then you have to start the patient on different interventions. So we can do therapeutic, psychotherapeutic interventions where we identify the positive and negative emotions which are related to this sexual interaction. We need to understand why the patient is not feeling like having sexual intercourse, what are the emotions associated with this. Then we basically try to make the patient understand the problem, and we offer the framework to understand the problem. And then we basically try to increase the interaction, address the various factors and correct them, and strategize to utilize and gradually overcome the sexual interaction obstacles. So this is typically the psychological side. And the medication side, typically treatment of any sexual dysfunction is important. If you understand, there could be a short frenulum, there could be a tight foreskin, there could be dyspareunia, there could be a erectile dysfunction, which we've already discussed the treatment of. There could be premature ejaculation, which we've already discussed the treatment of. And there could be low testosterone, which we've already covered, how we can supplement either testosterone if it's a couple who is beyond the fertility age, or otherwise giving clomiphene or any other patients. Start on mirtazapine or buspire or bupropion. All these are important agents with which we can improve partially the sexual desire. But the crux of the talk is that you have to understand whether there is actually a HSDD or low sexual desire. You have to ask the patients, because many times they won't tell. You have to ask them and get that information. Secondly, you try to classify why is the reason. Is it a relationship conflict? Is it a medical disorder? Is it a typical hormonal imbalance? Is it a hypoactive sexual desire disorder? And then based on that, you try and treat the patient. So I hope that, with this talk, you'll be able to at least grossly put those patients into some sort of an treatment algorithm and provide them some more help than you usually are able to get. Thank you so much again for the opportunity, and welcome to Dagini ma'am also into this seminar. Thank you, Dr. Priya.
Thank you, Dr. Raman, for such a deep explanation and understanding the problem of low sexual desire. And I just love the algorithm you put the things out, that how we have to categorize the patient and accordingly how to go ahead with it. Because at times we don't have the answers of the questions raised by these type of couple who are presenting to our clinic. Such a lovely presentation. Thank you, Dr. Raman. Always a pleasure listening to you. Welcome, Dr. Ragini ma'am, for the another electrifying talk of the series, that is the female arousal disorders. And madam, I don't think so she needs any introduction. She is the head and department of cosmetic and cosmetic gynecology and pelvic reconstructive surgery, W. Pratiksha Hospital. She's the director of PE Dermal Science Complete Clinic. Ma'am, if I start speaking your CV, then I think the whole section will go down.
I think all the listeners are the same every time. Thank you, Raman, teaching in my time. So female orgasmic disorder involves orgasm that is either absent, infrequent, markedly delayed in response to stimulation. Now, this elusive word of O is always discussed, and many a time it is really elusive to a woman. She never really have any orgasm. So it can be primary or secondary. Whenever we talk about any female disorder, either it is primary, means since start, or secondary. Previously, she had this orgasm, but now no longer able to do so. This chart we remember always whenever we are talking about the sexual disorder. So we always remember now it is a legimatized thing, and ICD code is also for all these female orgasmic disorders and all the sexual disorders. Always remember female sexual response cycle when you talk about this thing, desire, arousal. And always remember normal changes. That is very necessary. When we talk about the disorder, we should always first remember the normal changes. Whenever there's erotic feelings and vascular changes, they also characterize the excitement in the female, and vasocongestion occur. And this vasocongestion leads to the sexual flash. And not only that, labia minora and the majora both become congested and increase in the size. Now, what happened during orgasm? That is important. The inner 1/3 of the vagina continues to tend while the vasocongested organism platform involving the perineal, bulbocavernosus, and the pubococcygeus muscle rhythmically contract. And women frequently experience more orgasmic contraction than men. After orgasm, there's a resolution phase. Now, why there is no orgasm in many patients, specifically the secondary one? Because the relationship really matters, and specifically for women, the emotional tie-up is very, very important. So it all associated with emotional, psychological distress, lower sexual and the partner satisfaction, and decrements in the general health status, including aspects of the mental and physical health. So whenever this patient comes, we should have a detailed history, can take help of the many questionnaire. The questionnaire which I use is FSFI. I think most of the people use this. This is one of the most popular questionnaire form. This you can get on the internet. Now, by definition, what is orgasm? It is a sudden discharge of accumulated sexual excitement during the sexual response cycle, resulting in the rhythmic muscular contraction in the pelvic region, characterized by the sexual pressure. It is experienced by both, controlled by the involuntary or autonomic nervous system, and usually associated with involuntary actions of the muscular spasm in multiple areas of the body, not only in the pelvis, a general euphoric sensation, and frequently body movements and the vocalization. The period after orgasm, there's a lots of neurohormones which releases like oxytocin, prolactin, and endorphins, means endogenous morphines. The health effects surrounding the human orgasm are diverse. There are many physiological responses during sexual activity, including a relaxed state created by prolactin, and maybe changes in the central nervous system, such as a temporary decrease in the metabolic activity. And there's a wide range of the sexual dysfunction, like anorgasmia is also there. These effects affect cultural views of the orgasm, such as the belief that orgasm and the frequency or consistency of it are either important or irrelevant for the satisfaction in a sexual relationship. Now, what is achieving the orgasm? That is a very, very important thing. Orgasm can be achieved during a variety of activities, including vaginal, oral, or non-penetrative sex or masturbation also. They may also be achieved by the use of a sex toy, achieving orgasm by the stimulation of the nipple or other erogenous zone. Multiple orgasms are also possible, especially in women, but they are also uncommon. Multiple orgasms are orgasms that occur within a short period of one another. It may be a psychological stimulation alone and was first reported among people who had spinal cord injury. So any person can experience an involuntary orgasm, such as in the case of rape or other sexual assault also. So this is something not in your hand to have a orgasm. Now, scientific literature focus on the psychology of female orgasm significantly more than it does on the male orgasm, which appears to reflect the assumption that female orgasm is psychologically more complex, but this is not true. What is the found with the detailed survey that more or less both are same. In women, the most common way to achieve orgasm is direct sexual stimulation of the clitoris, meaning consistent manual, oral, or other concentrated friction against the external part of the clitoris. And it was found that 70 to 80% of women require direct clitoral stimulation to achieve orgasm. In women, the most common way to achieve orgasm is by direct sexual stimulation of clitoris. And it vary in the intensity, and women vary in the frequency of their orgasm. Clitoral orgasm are easier to achieve than the glance of the clitoris. And as the clitoris is a homologous to the penis, it is the equivalent in its capacity to receive sexual stimulation. One misconception, particularly in older research publication, is that the vagina is completely insensitive. This is not true. The greatest concentration of the vaginal nerve endings are at the lower third of the vagina. What is the G spot, which we all talk about? Basically, it is nothing. It is a nerve fibers on the anterior vaginal wall in the lower 1/3. And although it is controversial whether it is really a spot or a whole area, and in a different woman, a different area, maybe two to three, 4 spots are there. And vagina has significantly fewer nerve endings than the clitoris. This is a truth. One of the sex educator states that only one part of the clitoris, the urethral sponge, is in contact with the penis, fingers, or the dildo in the vagina. And they state that the tip of the clitoris and the inner lips, which are also very sensitive, are not receiving direct stimulation during penetrative intercourse. So there should be a quieter alignment technique if a woman is not having an orgasm. For some women, the clitoris is very sensitive after climax and making additional stimulation initially painful. The Master and Johnson is the name whenever we talk about the female sexual therapies or sexual medicine. It's a very, very common name and one of the most prominent name. He said that all the women are potentially multiply orgasm, and female is capable of rapid return to orgasm immediately following an orgasmic experience. Generally reported that women do not experience a refractory period, thus can experience an additional orgasm. And after the initial orgasm, subsequent orgasm for women may be stronger or more pleasurable than as the stimulation accumulates. Now it comes under the 3 categories. The tenting type derived from the clitoris stimulation, A-frame type derived from the G-spot stimulation, or blended type is a combination of the both. Somebody has said about the cervical stimulation also, but it is not found by other researchers. So female orgasm by means other than the clitoral or vaginal stimulation are less prevalent in scientific literature. The theory of the Freud is not very much accepted, as there's no evidence for this basic assumption, and the consequences of this theory are considerable. Many women felt inadequate when they could not achieve orgasm via vaginal intercourse alone. Alfred Kinsey was the first researcher who has criticized Freud and said that the most of the women he surveyed could not have vaginal orgasm, viewed the clitoris as the main center of the sexual response, and concluded that satisfaction from the penile penetration is mainly psychological or perhaps the result of the referred sensation. It was found that Master and Johnson research is also same that female orgasm is primarily of the clitoral orgasm. Now, what's the relationship within the clitoral and vagina? So it was found that the vagina's low concentration of the nerve endings and G-spot location are inconsistent. So still it is not accepted by any regulatory bodies that G-spot exists, but in the field of the sexual medicine or the cosmetic gynecology,
it has been discussed, it has been enhanced, and people come for it. And it was found that there is a whole area in the anterior vaginal wall where different women at different place can predict that they have more stimulation. So possible explanation for G-spot is that clitoral structures surround and extend along within the labia, number one, and clitoral and vaginal orgasm had the same stage of the physical response. So on the basis, researchers argued that the clitoral stimulation is the source of both kinds of the orgasm, reasoning that the clitoris is stimulated during penetration by friction against its hood, their motion that this provide the clitoris with sufficient sexual stimulation. Now, other scientists, what they come that women may be able to achieve vaginal orgasm via stimulation of the G-spot because the highly innervated clitoris is pulled closely to the anterior wall of the vagina. And spatial sensitivity of the lower vaginal wall could be explained by pressure and the movement of the clitoris root during a vaginal penetration and subsequent perineal contraction. So supporting a distinct G-spot study, Rider University published 2011, they have an MRI of a woman after stimulation, and they found that there's an area which is in the brain which is stimulated after the G-spot stimulation, and documented evidence that vaginal and the clitoral orgasm are separate phenomena that activate different areas of the brain and possibly suggest key psychological differences between women. Now coming to anorgasmia, that is the disorder. Regular difficulty reaching orgasm after ample sexual stimulation is called anorgasmia. In addition to sexual dysfunction being a cause for women's inability to reach orgasm, men generalizing women's trigger for orgasm based on their own sexual experience or with other women. Most of the men, they never even think of how to pleasure the woman and understand her body and make them to reach an orgasm. Scholars state many couples are locked in the idea that orgasm should be achieved only through the intercourse, and even the word foreplay means just a starting, but that is not true. It's not a foreplay, is a preparation of the main event, because women reach orgasm through intercourse less consistently than men, and they're more likely than men to have patent orgasm. It's a myth that using the penis is the main way to pleasure a woman. Besides, researchers concluding that women each 2 minute में करती हूँ 25% at the time with intercourse compared with the 81% of the time during oral sex. Now, data was analyzed from another Australian study of health in 2001 to 2002, and they also reached to the same thing that the vaginal intercourse alone, 12%, vaginal plus manual of the genitalia 49%, plus oral 19%. So what is the etiology? There may be contextual factor like consistently insufficient foreplay, early ejaculation by the partner, poor communication, or there's a psychological factors, cultural factors like lack of recognition or attention paid to female, some drug therapy like some antipsychotic drugs or SSRI, lack of knowledge about sexual function, damage to genital, sensory or autonomic nerves, or vulval dystrophy, or even in cases of a very big labia, this is also a very big reason. What are the symptoms and signs? Women with orgasm disorder often have other types of sexual dysfunction, maybe dyspareunia, pelvic floor dysfunction, anxiety disorder, or depressions. Now coming to this diagnosis, clinicians should go for a detailed history separately with the couple, then together. And it is a clinical based on the criteria in DSM-5, delayed, infrequent, or absent orgasm or markedly decreased, distress or interpersonal problem due to orgasm dysfunction, No other disorder or substance that exclusively account for the orgasm, must be more than 6 months, and type of stimulation that trigger orgasm varies widely. Clinician must use clinical judgment. Now coming to the treatment. It is self-stimulation, psychological therapy, or self-stimulation should be encouraged as a first-line treatment. A vibrator placed on the mons pubis close to the clitoris may help, as may increase the number and the intensity simultaneously if necessary. Education is really a mandatory thing. Sex therapy for women with or without their partners can often help them with concern about sexual performance and the feeling. Other psychological therapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy, as Raman has also said, psychotherapy, may help women identify and manage fear of vulnerability. Currently, no data suggests that any drug is really going to help them. Mindfulness is a new thing, which is based on the cognitive behavioral therapy also, that might be of some help to the woman. This one thing is there in the market, which is FDA approved, that is a Eros clitoral therapy device. And it is a device designed to treat female sexual arousal disorder and approved for the women who experience reduced sensation, lubrication, ability to achieve orgasm. Available by the prescription only. Device consists of a small vacuum pump that is placed over the clitoris to apply gentle suction to the region and increase blood flow, aiding in the sexual arousal. So coming to the last slide, what is the key point? We have to take DSM-5 clinical criteria. Only then we can say a person is having disorder. Treat with the direct masturbation, recommend sex therapy and other psychological therapy to help women identify and manage factors that contribute to orgasm disorder. Thank you so much for patient hearing. Welcome, Neeraj.
Right.
Thank you, ma'am, for enlightening this subject. I just want to ask some questions regarding that. So one thing is that, can you please throw some light about the procedures which will, are just prevailing these spot amplification and all those, cosmetic surgeries related to that?
So basically, a woman who comes to us, we have to really take a detailed history and spend the time for what she has come and what is her requirement, because it is not a disease. So supposing if she's coming for a G-stop amplification, so basically what is in my practice, I found G-spot is not a typical point for every woman. It is very, very different. And maybe a woman have 3-4 erogenous zone. So as we do the PV, put your finger on the anterior vaginal wall and you stimulate the anterior vaginal wall and ask the woman where she feels more of the excitement. And few people give the hyaluronic acid, inject that, but I usually go with the PRP, and it really, they have to come back for again and again. It is not going to be a permanent, say 4 months, 3 months, accordingly they have to come. It's a very simple thing, just as injection below the mucosa. Then patient coming with a labial hypertrophy, that is one thing which really put off many women from anything. So labioplasty is a choice in that. And depending on, again, you have to examine where there's a clitoral hood is also there, how long they are only in the mid segment, upper segment, lower segment. Accordingly, you have to choose your type of the labioplasty, whether it is just trimming or a wedge resection or a composite labioplasty. Then many a time, it is a very loose vagina, husband is not interested, they even ask about the anal sex. So interpersonal relationships are very important. So basically, I think vaginoplasty for a loose vagina is a boon for the woman for her quality of life. So these are the mainly operations like clitorodoplasty, labioplasty. Usually labioplasty and clitorodoplasty goes in hand in hand, and G-spot amplification, then vaginal thread. So there's so many operations they are there, but mostly one thing is there, we don't have so many of the patient. because it is a very, very niche segment who comes for that. Awareness is not also that much, and most of the our women around 35, 40, after that they don't even think of about much of the sex. They are busy with the kids and the family. That is also a very, very hard truth about this practice.
Thank you, ma'am. And regarding all those devices that we have discussed, are they available in India?
No, it's not available. It is only I have taken from the net because I know about this. So I have added here.
Dr. Ragini, I would like to say one thing about this device. We have to, because partner is more important than any device. Her husband or lover is a better instrument to stimulate and to achieve orgasm than any device can function. So it's couple therapy. It is a couple therapy, sexual dysfunction. So her husband's role is a very important in any type of sexual dysfunction.
Actually, education is the most important thing and the interpersonal relationship.
Thank you, ma'am, for enlightening us and for just sharing your experiences on this topic, enigmatic topic, basically. So I think so. There is a question there. I guess there is one question. My time from Sanu Dagi.
There's a question. Yeah, I really want to answer this thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, many women, they never smile. They never have any interest in the sex. For that, marital bed is not less than any rape bed. So every woman is not lucky to have a happiness in the night time. And many a time they have a fake orgasm, they have a fake sex and the fake smile on the face also. I have met so many successful, beautiful women. And when they talk about their sex life, it is totally zero. And not only zero, they are very, very oppressed and they never have any happiness. They are just really having this, they're leading this life, they're unhappily, totally unhappily. Dr. Neeraj, आप भी देखते हो, आप बताओ, आपके सब पास पेशेंट आते हैं?
Definitely, but sometimes we forget that sexual health is not only about intercourse. It's, so many other factors are there to have better sexual health. So it all depends last about the interpersonal relationship. So
it's a very big thing, very, very vast topic, and this interpersonal relationship is the crux of the everything.
Ma'am, but recently, actually, I've started seeing some couples. They have very good interpersonal relationships. Maybe they are in the relationship for many years, living it for many years. But suddenly, they are finding that lack of sex interest, or female has just lose the interest in the sex. So, what is and regarding if that we talk about the relationship, they are very good harmony and very good relationship with each other. So they ask for the advice. So how we do counsel these couples? Sir, can you please throw some light, Dr. Neeraj?
yeah, in recent time, see, depression is a major cause of sexual dysfunction. We have to rule out depression whenever such patient comes, because even if patient is not aware that she is suffering from depression, but in case actually she is suffering from depression, so we have to be very thorough about the history and to find out whether she is suffering from depression or not. Because mental issue is nowadays so common, it is a very common factor in causing the sexual dysfunction. What do you say, Dr. Ragini?
Totally agree with you, Neeraj, what you have said. Something is very, very debatable. And I think we can have a complete panel discussion on this discussion.
This is a very detrimental not only sexual health, but overall health. It is affecting very deeply to every individual. So stress is the main culprit in so many problems.
Also, ma'am, if I just when I've just seen couples, at times I found there is a bad sexual exposure in their childhood time, or maybe in their early part of life, which has lead them to finding out the loss of interest and loss of arousal in their sex life.
Hello.
Hello.
So coming to the next talk of the series, we'll welcome Dr. Neeraj. Sir will be doing a case-based discussion over the sexual problems. Sir is the chairperson of Sexual Medicine Committee, FOXY. He's a vice president, Rajkot Menopause Society. He's the past president, Rajkot Option Gynae Society. Over you to sir for some interesting case-based discussion over this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Priya, for your kind introduction, and thank you, Dr. Ragini ji, for inviting me to have my view on the female sexual interest and arousal disorder cases. I was when last year Dr. Ragini was my vice president in charge of my sexual medicine committee, and we worked together for so many webinars. So I'm really happy that she is continuing this sexual health issue even after her vice presidency. So let me share my screen. There are 4 types of female sexual dysfunction: problem of low sexual desire, diminished arousal, orgasmic difficulties, and last one is pain while sexual activity. These are the 4 broad category of female sexual dysfunction. Female sexual dysfunction is a highly prevalent condition. In a study, it found that in 40% of US women it was present, but only 11.5% of those reported distress with their sexual problems. And similar incidence was found in the European population. FSD has a profound effect on women's quality of life, overall health, as well as well-being. So, what is the difference between DSM-4 criteria and DSM-5 criteria? In DSM-4 criteria, these 2 disorders are now merged: female hyperactive sexual disorder and female arousal disorder. They have been combined into new category, that is female sexual interest or arousal disorder. Female orgasmic disorder is the same, while dyspareunia as well as vaginismus has been merged into a new category, that is genitopelvic pain or penetration disorder. So what's the justification for combining desire and arousal disorder in DSM-5? Because it is a highly overlap between desire and arousal in women. Desire and arousal problem often coexist in women. It's high correlation between validated measures for desire and arousal, and treatment for desire often improve arousal. So both have been combined in DSM-5 criteria. So to diagnosis, to label as a female sexual interest or arousal disorder, there should be at least 3 criteria present in women. First one is based on the hyperactive desire disorder, there should be either absent or decrease in the sexual interest and erotic thoughts or fantasy. New criteria based on 4 additional aspects of a sexual life and been added in this DSM-5. Absent or decrease in the initiation of the sexual activity or responsiveness to partners' attempt to initiate it. Excitement and pleasure during sexual activity. Arousal in response to sexual cue, and sensation during sexual activity, whether genital or non-genital. These 4 criteria either should be absent or it should be decreased. And out of these 6 criteria, 3 should be present to label as a FSI-AD. To make any diagnosis of sexual disorder, they should experience disorder 75 to 100% of the time, with the notable exceptions of substance or medication-induced disorder, and it requires minimum duration of approximately 6 months. Otherwise, we can't label as a sexual dysfunction. And most important is that it should cause a significant distress to person. If a person is not disturbed, it is not causing distress to the person, this should not label as a dysfunction. So what are the challenges in diagnosis of HSDD? When annual examination, physical examination patient come, it is a very good opportunity. Survey completed by the around 1200 women who sought routine peer screening. 45% of the patients, the topic of sexual health was not raised during their visit. 85% of the women expressed that the topic would be easier to discuss if the provider broached the topic. And it indicates that an untapped opportunity for improved communication and care. So we should always grab this opportunity whenever patients come to us. What are the barriers to diagnosis? Women often do not spontaneously mention this issue to their health care providers. In a survey of 450 premenopausal and postmenopausal women with a self-reported low sexual desire, results showed that 73% of the premenopausal women and 81% of the postmenopausal women reported having never mentioned their desire problem to their healthcare provider. In a larger survey of around 3,000 plus women with a distressing sexual problem, only 34.5% had a formally discussed their problem with their healthcare providers. In the two surveys, embarrassment contributed to women's unwillingness to speak or to seek help from healthcare providers. So this is a very barrier to the diagnosis of the problem. And low sexual desire generally increase with the age. It related to distress is decreased and resulting in a fairly steady prevalence of HSDD across the adult lifespan. Many women believe that it is simply a part of aging, and more than 1/3 the primary reason for not seeking the treatment because they believe this is a normal lifestyle changes, and though they don't seek any help for that. It is very important to recognize barrier to communication between healthcare providers and patients. What are the barriers for the healthcare provider? One is the embarrassment. There is a lack of confidence in treating HSDD. There is a time constraint because we have a very busy OPD. Believe that there are no effective treatments, so we don't try to find out the problem. There is inadequate medical or training in the field of sexual medicine. There is an evolving definition of FSD because it's changing in last so many decades, is always changing about the definition and management of the FSD. So we are not that much comfortable with the subject. And there is a limited knowledge of available diagnostic tools because it is a very difficult, we have to mainly deal with the history part. Otherwise, there is no specific investigation or any other things available to diagnose this type of conditions. And what are the potential patients' barrier? They feel embarrassed. There is a social and cultural attitude towards the sex. There is a reluctance to discuss sexual issue with the healthcare providers. Believe that the healthcare provider may be embarrassed or reluctant to discuss. And they also believe that the healthcare provider will not treat them as a serious issue. So all this can cause to the problem, add to the problem. And who should manage sexual dysfunction? Female sexual dysfunction particularly. Patient usually present to the gynecologist initially, but many gynecologists do not want to open the Pandora's box. Specialized referral should not be routine practice unless it is requested by the patient. If there is a serious psychopathology like psychosis, body dysmorphia, or resistance to conventional therapy, or in case of recent cases, or there is a presence of specific endocrine or anatomical disorder. Otherwise, we can fairly good manage this type of patient. What are the effects of female sexual interest or arousal disorder? It is leads to chronic stress, it leads to anxiety, it leads to depression, there is a lack of concentration, it can lead to insomnia, irritability, it can lead to relationships conflict, and it can lead to social withdrawal. So now let's coming to the clinical part. Let us discuss our first case. A 52-year-old lady underwent menopause 3 years ago and she is no longer interested in sex. There is no issue with the lubrication or pain and feeling difficulty mainly because of obesity. So low libido after menopause is a misconception. Obesity is a mechanical difficulty in certain sex position. Vigorous exercise will help to overcome the pelvic floor laxity, and we can also help the patient by asking them to change the timing of the sexual intercourse, because osteoarthritis worse in the evening and rheumatoid arthritis is worse in the morning. So we can advise patient to choose the different time when they are more comfortable with their body. And coming to the hormonal therapy for menopausal women, we have systemic HRT. HRT can improve sexual functions and dyspareunia. We have to balance between risk versus benefit ratio, and early initiation of theory is a helpful. We have another molecule in our basket is a Tibolone. It is an androgenic drug. It does not stimulate breast and endometrium. May be considered as a first choice as HRT in women with low libido. Then there is a local estrogen therapy. Even in a woman on systemic HRT, vaginal regeneration is often inadequate without local estrogen. It improves lubrication and sexual function in case of vaginal atrophy, can be used safely in women whom HRT is contraindicated. The symptoms may return once they are stopped. Long-term therapy is often needed, but long-term safety data on use beyond 1 year is lacking. Then androgen replacement therapy. We are not that much comfortable with the androgen. In women with a low libido, the level of serum testosterone has been found to be lower than the age-matched control. Testosterone can be considered if despite HRT, the low libido does not improve. Conventional HRT increases serum hormone binding globulin, which reduces the free testosterone, which causes low sexual drive. Besides sexual and vaginal health, testosterone therapy may improve cognition as well as bone health. What are the previous preparation available? Testosterone preparation available. It is oral, injectable oral implants is available. Transdermal preparation of gels is also available. But out of all these, transdermal or gel is a preferred mode of treatment. What are the side effects when we are putting on testosterone? What are the side effects we can encounter? One is the cosmetic. It can lead to hirsutism as well as acne, but it is usually mild. It can cause irreversible virilizing changes like waist stiffening, clitoromegaly, but they are rare and only occur with the excessive dosing. It can lead to insulin resistance, leading to increased susceptibility toward the metabolic syndrome. Most androgens are aromatized to estrogen, which can cause effect on the breast, endometrium, as well as cardiovascular system. No consensus on definition of female androgen deficiency is there. The cutoff value to define the hypoandrogenism in female is still lacking. And we have to consider medical legal aspect also. The transdermal testosterone patch is licensed in Europe and US for the treatment of HSTD in surgically menopausal women on concomitant HRT. No pharmacological therapy is currently approved for the treatment of HSTD in premenopausal or naturally postmenopausal women and further research is urgently needed in this population. And adequate counseling is required whenever we put patient on testosterone. Duration of the testosterone therapy, the duration of the studies is generally from 3 to 12 months. The long-term safety of the testosterone therapy cannot be assured. So it is a short-term remedy. Then coming about the DHEA. Now DHEA we are using in so many conditions. It is also useful in HSDD because it is a precursor of adrenal androgen. DHEA supplementation can improve the sexual desire, it can improve arousal as well as orgasm because by possibly converting into testosterone. It may have an androgenic side effect like acne. Vaginal DHEA may be reduce the systemic side effect, and in some countries it is available as a DHEA gel which we can apply on the locally vaginally, but needs further studies on safety as well as efficacy. This is a Cochrane data review where for a lot of the companies, the DHEA work versus control, and DHEA might slightly improve the sexual function compared to placebo in peri and postmenopausal women, but there is no evidence that DHEA improves sexual function more than HRT. So more research is needed about the role of DHEA in sexual dysfunction. Now coming to non-hormonal therapy. In previous talk, Dr. Agni already told about the vaginal lubricants. It can be used alone or along with the vaginal estrogen in vaginal atrophy. It is less effective than the vaginal estrogen. Then there is a phytoestrogen, sorry. Before advising, explain if there is an inadequate evidence on the safety and efficacy, possibility of the drug interaction, and the amount of active drug in this preparation may vary considerably. So we have to use with the pinch of salt. So now coming to second case, a 32-year-old woman presented with the low libido after cesarean section done 6 months ago. Previous sex life was normal. There is a adequate lubrication, penetration, as well as orgasm. But she finds her husband's insistence on regular intercourse disturbing. So how to proceed? This is another entity that is known as the postpartum female sexual interest or arousal disorder. What is needed is a partner support. Sometimes change in the position can help to manage such type of patient. Cross leg is sometimes beneficial, and Kegel exercise is we all know is very important to restore the pelvic floor muscles. Lubrication in the postpartum period is very important, and most importantly, they have to rejuvenate the romance, ambience, part together, remove boredom of the bedroom is very important to your postpartum disorder. And sometimes episiotomy is there, so the stitch is causing problem, and sometimes reconstructive surgery is also needed if there is a scar giving pain to the patient. Then there are lifestyle changes, reducing stress, exercise, yoga, and other relaxation technique or support groups they can join. Regular date night is important. To spend 1 or 2 nights away from the family responsibility can rejuvenate their sex life in postpartum period particularly. If they are professional, do not carry your office to your bedroom. And to improve body image, because pregnancy, we all know in this part of country, we have so much oily food and so many preparation going throughout the pregnancy as well as in postpartum period, which can lead to weight gain. So sometimes it is also an issue. So we have to advise about the weight reduction. In some cases, bariatric surgery, if it is advisable, then regular exercise program, treating pelvic floor dysfunction is very important in postpartum period. Now coming to psychotherapy, cognitive behavior therapy is an important part. Treatment of the underlying psychiatric problem. There is no problem in the mind or head of the woman. To focus on helping the woman to identify and modify the culprit factor like maladaptive thoughts, unrealistic expectations, and inadequate erotic stimuli. And in some cases, there is substance abuse, so we have to advise accordingly. Educating women and male to remove the myths and misconception is very important. We have to address cultural or religious concern also, and we have to assign the specific exercise to improve their sexual life. Detailed instruction about each step is given and the feedback is collected regarding the progress. In step-wise manner, each person gradually develops to know his or her body, which is very sensitive. Only if the progress is satisfactory, the couple will be guided to move to the next step. This is a sex therapy for the couple. Based on the terminology used by the Master and Johnson, there are 3 types: non-genital sunset focus, genital sunset focus, and then ultimately vaginal containment. Sunset focus is the heightening sensory awareness, basically. There are 4 stages. Stage 1 is where partner touch each other. In stage 2, partner touch each other's genitalia. And in stage 3, there is a mutual touching. And in stage 4, woman on top is ultimately the final outcome. Sex therapy is always couple therapy because sex is between 2 persons and you can't treat individual. You have to manage them as a couple. Both the partners should be seen together, and the PLISSIT model is a very popular model in sex therapy for couple. The permission is PLISSIT is a permission, limited information, specific suggestion, as well as intensive sex therapy. These 4 stages are there in PLISSIT model. Coming about the pharmacotherapy, there are these all modules available: flibanserin, bupropion, buspirone, bremelanotide. Then there is a PDE5 inhibitor is also available. Then ginseng and other drugs. Flibanserin is a serotonin 1A agonist and 2A antagonist that decrease serotonin level and increase the level of dopamine and norepinephrine in certain part of brain. It is only drug approved by FDA for sexual dysfunction, specifically female sexual interest or arousal disorder. Common adverse effects are the somnolence, dizziness, dry mouth, as well as nausea. But we have to advise patient not to take the alcohol. It was flibanserin when we all know as a female Viagra. When it come, it was so much hype around it, but it has not lived up to the expectation. Then another is the second one is the bupropion. Is the second line of treatment. It is a centrally acting agent. The mechanism of action is likely similar to the flibanserin. Dose is 150 mg per day, particularly in SSRI-induced sexual dysfunction. Then buspirone, it can be helpful, particularly in SSRI-induced low libido. And there is a bremelanotide. It is a melanocortin receptor agonist, but it is still under investigation, is not approved by the FDA. Then PDE5 inhibitor, that is Viagra, it generally have not proven efficient in the woman. Studies of the sildenafil, there are inconsistent results. Positive effects have been demonstrated in a premenopausal woman with SSRI-associated sexual dysfunction. Ginseng is someone in few cases it has been tried. It is we all know it is an oriental herb. Then placebo. Yes, sometimes placebo can work when we are dealing with the sexual dysfunction patient. Vitamin tablets can work. What is best aphrodisiac? An interesting and interested partner is the best aphrodisiac for any woman. Relationship with new partner, research on the sexual function consistently demonstrate that is an increased libido and pleasure when patient move to new relationship. Where there is a marriage without love, there will be love without marriage. So we have to also keep in mind about this thing. Now coming to third case, young couple married for 2 years but never consummated. On the first night, she did not allow him to penetrate. She was anxious that the vagina would not accommodate the large penis. She tried lubricants and psychotherapy. Men did not want to hurt her anymore, but she started feeling depressed. Even there was difficulty in pap smear sampling. So source of problems is inadequate knowledge about sex, fantasies or misconceptions that vagina is too small, narrow, or elegant to accommodate the erect penis. Discuss for many genital organs and semen. Sex is something shameful, sleepy, or wrong. It is all taught in the family. Upbringing in the orthodox environment. There is a bad experience with the procedure like cervical smear collection, pelvic examinations, and labor. It can lead to sexual dysfunction. When there is a non-cooperative partner, there is an infidelity of the partner, or overtly supporting partner also can lead to the sexual dysfunction. So solution, what is the solution? Offering genital examination and exploring the woman's fantasy about the vagina. We have to sometimes use the mirror concept is popular when patient is given mirror and we allow them to see the vagina and outer part of the genitalia, because many women have never seen their vagina in mirror. So this can this is a one type of therapy. We have to give proper sex education. That vagina is a highly elastic, it is a highly accommodative organ, and multidisciplinary approach is there. Now coming to case number 4, couple happily married for 5 years, having a baby girl, but man said he is not interested in sex. She said having enough desire and lubrication, but soon after penetration, my interest lost. So this is a terminology like early orgasmic response. This is equivalent to premature ejaculation in male. After play is also important, and in some cases SSRI like paroxetine 20 milligram 2 to 4 hours before sex we can give to such type of patient. Then coming to case number 5, young couple had a very happy sex life, consulted doctor for infertility for 1 year of duration. As we know, they have been advised to time intercourse from day 12 to 18, but wife suffer from lack of interest and describe sex as a mechanical entity. So we all there are so many publications about the treatment of infertility and how badly it can affect the sexual health of the woman. Female sexual dysfunctions and time intercourse. There was a prospective study of 105 unfertile women. There is another study where time intercourse in the couple doing more harm than the benefit in terms of sexual dysfunctions and time to become pregnant. So people who are concerned about their fertility should be informed that the vaginal sexual intercourse every 2 to 3 days optimize the chances of pregnancy, because if we advise them to have a sexual intercourse between 12 and 18, it can definitely lead to the sexual dysfunction in so many patients. So we have to give advice that you can continue sexual activity before that also and after that window period. And coming to sex case number 6, young couple presented 6 months after the marriage. Women not interested in sex for last 4 months. On examination, there was a hollow pouch near the urethra. So this is basically a case of lack of knowledge. So what we can advise patient, female can guide the male. In that, it is easier to put the food in your mouth rather than trying to feed someone. So education is such type of cases is very useful. And coming to case number 7, a 26-year-old woman presented with a reduced libido. He was separated with boyfriend 3 years ago and recently found a female partner. Initially more interested in sex with her and feels she is not woman anymore. So nowadays, this is also we have to keep in mind about the sexual orientation, about heterosexuality, homosexuality, because concept of sexuality is not necessarily static. It is a very fluid status. So person can have a variety of sexual orientation as they in the total lifespan. Because there is they can have a heterosexual, but they can go up to the becoming homosexual. So we have to keep this also in mind when managing such type of patient. So it is very important to see the patient with the couple, because both partners we have to see them together as well as separately to know the proper history, and the couple is the unit. And there is a difference in male and female thinking process. In female, there is a need of commitment. There is so many other things when what they want about the relationship. But in men, it is mainly about the sex. It is not a nowadays black and white, but it is more of gender thing we can think about. So what are the difference in sexuality? Female, only about 1/4 of women think about sex daily, while male, the majority of adult men think about sex at least once in a day. Female want commitment throughout the relationship. Male wants sex at the start of the relationship, in the middle, and after many years of it also. In female, there is a lot of emotion along with the sexual encounter, while in male, there is a little emotional involved in the sexual relationship. And in female, wants lot of sex with the partner they love in suitable ambience. But in male, they want lots of sex only. So take home message: low libido is underreported, under-evaluated, and undertreated. Proper history taking will disclose the diagnosis in most cases. Problem is between 2 legs. Problem is in between 2 years. So sex is a thing between your 2 years, not in between your 2 legs. And both the partners should be seen together. Non-pharmacological interventions often work well. So thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Neeraj, for the wonderful presentation on the very important topic nowadays, because we all are facing such practical problems with the patients. And I think you have covered all the cases very beautifully, like whatever we need to advise, her psychosocial support, whatever the medicines are available in all the age groups. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
So thank you, Neeraj. And with this, we came to the end of this part of the series, and we will meet on the 4th Thursday again in the next month with the new series. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry that you're all in for your inconvenience, but because of that I got late. Otherwise, I was at my home half an hour before.
Wonderful talk and wonderful, discussion on this topic. And I really thank you for starting this series and just educating us for, newer concept things, because this topic is really a very hidden topic, and we are really facing a lot of patients with this type of complaints. And every episode is so electrifying and is coming with a new topic, new learning every series. Thank you, everyone. For
There is
this,
your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to answer that. nighttime happiness is the boom for married couples. But why we are always thinking that sex is we always associate sex with the night only. It is not a nocturnal phenomenon. Sex can happen any time of day. It can be happen in morning, in afternoon, evening, night. So we don't have to stereotype that sex is only night thing.
And so you discuss such common issues. We are daily facing these patients in our OPD. Like
Yes.
they usually come, they're very shy in presenting their complaints. So we have to dig in their history and come out with the reason for their loss of interest or something issues like that.
They need some sympathetic ear. If you start asking them, they will come out with so many things.
Yes, yes, sir. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ragini ma'am, for starting this wonderful series. And it's really very knowledgeable to understand the basics of all these sexual disorders. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Rima, for joining, and everyone who has joined and shared their time and with the part of it. Thank you, and over to the team Jackson Park.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Jackson Law presents Lycorate soft gel to improve the erectile dysfunction. Lycopene in Lycorate improves the endothelial dysfunction. Nitric oxide improves low-grade inflammations, improve oxidation burden of ischemic erectile tissues, and reduces oxidative stress. Thus, improves the erectile function. In erectile dysfunction, Lycorate protects nitric oxide priority. The most trusted form of estrogen, micronized Endonorm EV2, estradiol 2 mg tablet, and Endoreg 2 mg tablet for Dynogest for medical management of endometriosis. My teammate, Dr. Deepika Chhabra, joins me. I'm excited to thank the respected faculty and all the attendees who has attended with us today. And thank you for joining in. We hope to see you again tomorrow for pro-retro webinar on intrapartum surveillance. Please do register to join. Thank you so much.